Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar, Build Faster with Base Lightning Components. My name is Arabella David, and I'm Director of Developer Relations here at Salesforce. Today, we're joined by Marcus Torres, who's our product dude for Lightning. That's how he wants to be introduced, but officially, as you can see from the slide, he's our Senior Director of Product with Lightning. And today, he's going to be talking about building faster apps with base Lightning components, with a focus on what's new for Winter 18. Is that right?
That's right.
Awesome.
Nice to be here, Arabella. Thank you.
We're super excited about it. So before we do get started, we of course have the safe harbor slide. So before we share anything further, it's a quick note that when you're considering future developments, whether by us or with any other solution provider, you should always base your purchasing decisions on products and features that are currently available. We are a publicly traded company, so please make your buying decisions only on the products commercially available from Salesforce. And with that, we're ready to get started with today's session, Build Faster with Base Lightning Components and Marcus Torres. Take it away.
So, thanks, Arabella. I'm excited to be here. The team has done amazing things, especially in winter, which I'm going to walk you through. I just wanted to throw out a couple additional things for those of you who are kind of the social czars in your network. You can feel free to tweet at Force Webinar and at mentioning Salesforce Salesforce developers on Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, YouTube.
And I don't know if you missed it earlier, but we have Marcus's handle on Twitter if you want to ask him questions directly.
Sure, or say great things, and if you don't have great things, just at mention Arabella. So today, one of the big things is I know many of you that are listening are probably familiar with components and have even started to play with them. But for some of you on the call, you need a little bit of kind of a base understanding because essentially Lightning and the Lightning components and the Lightning framework is different than kind of traditional customization framework of Salesforce, which was Visualforce in the past. So I'm going to go over this. I'm going to help you understand how the components work, how to actually do that development, piecing it all together, and then doing some actual code. And we're going to go through that, and of course, finish off with everything that everybody asks a product manager, which is what is the roadmap and what does this look like? So let's get started. So in Lightning and the Lightning platform, you really have a lot of what you've grown to know over the course of the years, right? You understand that there's kind of this trusted infrastructure at the very bottom. And then you have a bunch of shared services and tools and data and event services, as well as a bunch of kind of the Force.com platform services that you've known to kind of grow and love over the course of understanding Salesforce. But what's really changed with the introduction of Lightning is really this new application layer, right? This application layer is where essentially all of the new Lightning framework is, where our testing service and instrumentation, how SLDS, is essentially propagated across all of our applications, where we manage things like navigation and accessibility. All of that is really part of this application layer. And of course, part of that application layer is components. Now, when you really look at the components, they really break up into base and experience components. But this application layer itself is where you will customize essentially not only Sales Cloud, but Service Cloud, really all of our core applications. This is that customization layer, and this is what this application layer is all about. So going back to components, components are your building blocks for the Lightning UI, right? We use Lightning components ourselves. When we piece together some of the new features and functionality of Lightning, and that is exactly the same way you will use these components as building blocks for your customizations in Lightning. So when it really starts with the base components, right? Think of these as kind of the Lego pieces, if you will. These are the individual blocks, right? And it could be a simple badge, it could be an icon, it could be an input, or it could be something like a tab set. But all of these base components are generally quite dumb, for using an interesting word. They don't have a lot of functionality built into them by default, right? By default, they're just meant to be kind of visual building blocks. And then as you construct them and you add your own logic and you add your own kind of capabilities, they become experience components. So in this example of the chatter feed, you have the tab and the tab set. You have a series of buttons and icons. You have input rich text. You have, essentially just the Lightning button with, a label on it that says share. All of this is about constructing that experience components from these base components. And if you are unfamiliar with kind of UI frameworks, regardless of Lightning or not, but basically modern JavaScript UI frameworks, they're really about composition. So if you are more traditionally kind of a back-end Java developer or an object-oriented programmer, think of how you would have inheritance in those kind of languages. And that's what composition is in modern UI kind of JavaScript frameworks. And so on the right side with the experience component, essentially this chatter feed component is essentially a composition of all of these base components tied in with functionality, right? So if you think of those kind of Russian dolls, right? All of those dolls, you keep opening it up and there's another one and another one, another one until you get to the bottom. And that's really kind of a way to think about this.
But I'm glad you didn't call it Matryoshka components.
That'd
be quite a mouthful.
Well, I every time I say that, I get corrected at the Lightning Now tour. So
it's Matryoshka.
So I just say Russian doll. So if you actually look at our Lightning pages, they are made up of these experience components. The highlights panel, the tabs, the publisher, the activity timeline, sales path. All of these are experience components. And then, of course, Lightning itself is made up of these pages. And this is what is so different between our classic experience and the Lightning experience from a development perspective. We actually use the same technology and the same components that we're essentially offering to you to use. And the great part about that is as you build some of these customizations, they can actually listen and essentially have logic that's based on our own standard components. Where in, say, Salesforce Classic with Visualforce, the second you wanted to change the page, you had to take ownership of the entire page. You had to overwrite the entire page. You had to maintain that entire customization, when all you may have wanted to do is add a small section at the top. And that's what's really powerful about this component-based framework, is essentially now you can just add the pieces that you want to the existing kind of out-of-the-box experience that we offer within Lightning. Now, once you have those experience components, the question is, where do you put them, right? How do I organize this into the existing experience? So this is where App Builder really comes into play, right? For many of you that have taken a look at App Builder before, you have a series of kind of basic standard components within the App Builder, but we're bringing a lot more in winter. But we're also allowing for all the custom components that you may write to, of course, appear right here in the App Builder. And so now that you've built this custom experience component, you simply use the App Builder to place it, kind of drag and drop it wherever it makes sense within your application. And that can be on record pages, that can be on app pages, that can be on the home page. Those customizations are really up to you and where you want to place this experience component. And just remember, an experience component can be really, really small, a simple button with some logic, or it can be really, really large, and essentially be a custom app, kind of like a, what would traditionally be called a single page application that could do a whole series of functionality and features. And if you actually think about it, the reality is Lightning in its total entirety is one huge single application, right? It's one huge single component that is the most complex, most nested kind of Russian doll of all time. But that's essentially what it is. We've used composition where we've taken various pages. Those pages have experience components. Those experience components have base components. And we've essentially constructed that all together into a single application. So now that we kind of talked about the structure of how you take base components, you build experience components, and eventually you expose those into Lightning, let's talk about the development of components, right? So at first, it all starts really with this bundle, right? What we call the component bundle. And there's various elements to it, right? You have the markup. So this is essentially the HTML markup of your component. This is where you're going to have additional kind of what we call framework interfaces, or markup, essentially kind of a logic, things like aura render if or aura if, as well as a few of those, and we'll see some of that in the code later. And then of course you have your client-side controller. So this is essentially your JavaScript that you write that is essentially running client-side. That's, if you click on a button, you have a method within your client-side controller that says handle this click, right? Now the helper, this is where you want essentially functions that perform very singular operations, right? These are, potentially, I'm going to go fetch data, right? Because you may have multiple functions within your client-side controller that go and retrieve data. So this is where you want to use essentially the helper to kind of isolate those for both testing and overall maintenance, right? Of course, there comes the styling, right? So component styles are huge. This is what brings the great experience to your end users. And of course, you can use the Salesforce Lightning design system and essentially all of the work that we've done there to kind of to leverage our styling so that your customization looks exactly like the rest of Salesforce. Documentation, so this can show up easily within kind of the document or the doc site. And this is even for your custom components, of course. And then the design file is something that's really, really cool. This is where you take all of that great work you've done as a developer, and you now are extending that capability to the non-developer. So to, the admin. So the design file, the way that works is essentially you create essentially kind of configuration parameters. Those configuration parameters will appear in the Lightning App Builder, and this will allow your admin to configure your customization with clicks versus code, and really kind of brings those two sides of your business together, and the developer and the admin or the business user, right? The SVG is just a custom icon, so it has an icon within the app builder. And the last is the renderer. Now, almost every time I have seen a renderer, we have, and we've kind of reviewed it, we've suggested not using it, in all honesty, because this really allows you to override the component lifecycle, right? There's examples out there, but this is something that we think is eventually just not going to be needed and is most of the time not necessary with most of our components.
So use with caution for renderer.
Yeah, use with caution. Again, almost every time we have come across it, it just wasn't necessary.
Okay.
But it is part of the component bundle, so I want to make sure I can explain it to everyone on the call. So now that you have the bundle, you can use the Lightning design system as a way to essentially make sure that your component styles match the rest of Salesforce. This ensures a consistent user experience, right? So think of all of the customizations you may have made in Salesforce Classic, and the fact that your customization tended to not look anything like the rest of Salesforce at the time. Well, what we've done is we've been as open as possible. We've said we are going to give you every font, every color, every style, even all of the design tokens, so that as you build your customization, you can leverage those. And as we change our design over time, you get those changes for free. You don't have to go and try to restyle it. You don't have to go and try to make it look like the rest of Salesforce. It will just naturally change with our releases. Another great thing about the design system is it already has a series of components that that essentially we use to create as the base for the styles for our Lightning components. Now, if that just confused you, you're not alone. I just want to kind of point that out, that the Lightning design system and its components are not a one-for-one match with the programmatic Lightning base components that you would use to essentially build out your own customizations. They are very close, they are related, and in future documentation, we will be providing, clarity around this has a design system component, and from the design system, this has a Lightning component equivalent, so that you understand that. But not everything is covered that's in the Lightning design system, and some of the nomenclature that the Lightning design system isn't necessarily the same nomenclature that we use from a programmatic component. There's good reasons for that, because we're trying to match certain kind of web standards.
Okay, based on the feedback from the Q&A, it looks like people really want to see this in action soon. So I'm sure you have something in the demos.
I do.
Right?
I am going shortly. So on the development tools, we of course have our web-based IDE, the Dev Console, as well as you can use a plugin for Sublime and Eclipse, of course, with the Force IDE. So I know you guys are tired of slides. I'm tired of slides. So let's just go into it and let's start to look at some code, shall we? So what I've done is this is my essentially my developer org, and one of the key things that always comes up with customizations is I have a process that you don't match Salesforce. Like your out-of-the-box UI, your click path, all of that stuff doesn't match what I'm gonna, how I use essentially my process or my business process. And so one example that I have here is essentially how you onboard customers. Right now, technically, can I go and create a child record and use a quick action? Sure, I can do all that, but that's not the process I have for my business. So instead, I've essentially created my own onboarding experience. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this page, and I'm going to drag in a custom component that's called the onboarding button. Now, I could have put the whole experience in line within the page, but I wanted to show you some of the power of these new components that are coming in Winter 18, which for some of you is going to hit as early as this weekend. So now that I put that kind of onboard customer button, let me go ahead and start the developer console, and let's actually look at some code related to it. So I'm going to go in the dev console up here, and I'm going to say open Lightning resources, and I'm going to open two things. I'm going to open up this onboarding component, and I'm also going to open up the onboarding button and the underlying customer onboarding component. Now, one of the things that we did that we're delivering in Winter is a way to essentially create an overlay. So think of this as kind of panels over the experience. So you can see here, all I have here is a button, and when you click on that button, it says launch the onboarding wizard. And so here, if I can get back my page, which apparently I can't, so let me try that again. It's not popping open, so I'm gonna just go ahead and close it and start one more time. Sorry about that. And it's still not, there we go. Okay, so here in the controller, when I click over, you can see when it says Launch Onboarding Wizard, I say, go ahead and create a new component called the Custom Customer Onboarding Component. To that component, I want to pass the actual record ID. That's essentially the record ID of this lead. And then within the callback here, what I'm using is a new library. So there's two new libraries in Winter. One's called the Overlay Library. The other one's the Notification Library. And what I'm doing is I'm essentially saying, show a custom modal and give it a header. For the body, I'm essentially passing the components here, which is the customer onboarding component. Show the close button, and I can even apply additional CSS class. So in this case, I'm making it a large modal. So, and then to kind of walk through that, so if I tap on here, I essentially get this modal. You can see there's a close button. And essentially this is the onboarding wizard, which was my title. And now I essentially have this onboarding experience. So I'm going to actually go through this onboarding experience really quickly. And then I'm going to spend a bunch of time looking through the code of that. So within this overlay, essentially what I'm using is a card. The card provides essentially a main content area and has a footer and it has a header. And so within this onboarding, you can see I pre-populated some of this information from the lead. So for example, the name, the phone number, the email. But I'm going to start to choose essentially what this customer is all about. So I'm going to choose that they're a consumer, that it's a 24-month term. And here is a great component that was added in Winter, which is essentially the file upload component. So if you potentially have created a file upload yourself over in the past because you didn't have this component, you had to do a lot of work. You try to work around these apex restrictions, and that kind of the largest file you could load was roughly like 4.5 megs. Well, now we've taken all of the power of files and we've essentially given you a file upload that can support a single file up to 2 gigs, right? And so here you can see that I selected the file, it went ahead and uploaded the file, and I just simply hit done. And this is all done with a very simple component. And so you can see the contract is attached. When I click next, I'm going to show you one of our other components, right, which is our dual list box. So this dueling list box, it essentially allows you to kind of move things over from kind of an available section of options on the left to a selected set of options on the right. This was a kind of a common pattern we had in Classic all over the place. And we wanted to really bring that to Lightning as well. You can do things in this component like mark things as required. So not only will they be pre-selected, but the user cannot move things in and out of, or they can't move it out of that selection. So here I'm just gonna pick platform, right? I'm a platform guy, I love platforms, so I'm gonna add kind of base product suite in the platform. And then I'm gonna click next. And when I click next, I'm gonna point out in this footer, because we're using the progress indicator component, that in the footer, just by kind of progressing the steps, you get all of that styling. It says, hey, this is complete. I am now on the 3rd step, and the first 2 steps are done, right? Now, on this final page, this is one of the components we're most excited about, which is our Lightning data table component. This essentially is the same component that drives things like list views. So anytime you have a list of data and you want to essentially display that to your users, this is a really, really powerful component to help you do that. So I'm just taking a look at Javier here, and it seems that everything matches what I expect for the onboarding. And then I just click onboard and I am done. Right now, I'm showing that it's completed here, but there's a method where you can actually close this automatically as well. But I'm gonna go ahead and close this. And now that you've kind of seen the experience, let's actually walk through it, with the code. So I'm gonna go to this onboarding component, customer onboarding, and let's go ahead and take a look at the component itself, right? So of course, we have a bunch of attributes. We're gonna use that throughout the kind of purpose of this component. But I wanted to point out a few of the key things, right? First is the dual list box. So the dual list box, this is essentially attributes that provide those two different sides of that category. So what is the list of options? What are the default options that I want to be kind of pre-populated, and if there's any required options. The next is force record data. So force record data is what we call the Lightning Data Service. This will GA in winter 17, and it's, what did I say?
Winter 17.
I meant winter 18. So winter 18, so this is fully GA'd. If you recall in summer, this was a beta feature, but this now is fully GA'd. And it's honestly, I haven't seen a developer write a component that's related to a record without using this since it's come out, if they knew about it. So super, super powerful. It essentially, it's the standard controller for Lightning. It allows you to do everything for fetching a record, doing CRUD operations on that record, or even creating new records without writing any Apex at all. It still is for a single record, but in the future it will support multiple records. And so that's what force record data does here. This is essentially what I use to populate the customer's information from the record ID I passed over from the onboarding button. So just to give you the recap here, I had record ID, which I had it in the button, or I passed that field over from the button to this component, and I use that record ID here to actually fetch all of the records that are essentially part of the page layout for this particular record. So now this is the card that I mentioned. This is essentially the space of the entire modal. Now the card has essentially a footer, it has a title, it has the whole, essentially everything related to the card. You can see that you can either set the title here, or you can override it, which I did here with with essentially this aura set attribute title, and I made that customer onboarding, right? Also within the card, I have used the Lightning layout component. So the Lightning layout component essentially allows me to place a bunch of sections of data within and kind of lay it out as I see fit. And I've created 3 sections essentially within this Lightning layout. And you can kind of consider them rows, if you will. But each section essentially was each progression of that customer onboarding experience. So the first was all around the data, so the name, the phone number, the email, the type, etc. The second was the dual list box, which you see here. And then the third is the Lightning data table, which you see here. And within that Lightning data table, I'm passing just the data itself, which is essentially an array of data. In this example, I essentially constructed that in my controller, but you would do this by essentially calling Apex and then getting the results from Apex, and then kind of setting the attribute that you pass in here. The column definition is very easy, and we'll go over that in a bit. But finally, when the last thing on the Lightning card is the footer, or essentially the footer of the card, which is where where we saw the progress indicator, which was that blue bar, and each time I advanced to the next step, it would automatically mark the previous step is completed. And so you see the little blue checkbox. And all of this is, I mean, it's easy, right? It's essentially markup. I have a button for next and kind of going stage to stage, and then I handle that button through my controller. So now that you've kind of seen kind of the markup side of this component, let's go ahead and look at the controller of this component. So here, these options are essentially the options that show up in that dual list box. Of course, you may populate this through, calling into, Apex with a controller and kind of fetching back the various values, or you simply put it in essentially an object like I have here, and I'm passing that over to the list options. So the list options is the attribute which gets assigned to the dual list box. And you could see I also have values for the default options and the required options, which essentially forces those options to be there. I want to go ahead and move down to the data table. So the data table component is really interesting, right? This supports all of the various field types that we have within Salesforce today. And we do that by essentially kind of mapping them all to primitive types. So you can see here, I have the various column definitions. And this is, the customer column, the product column, the term, and if they're enrolled or not. And I made these all text, but if it was an email, it would act as an email. If it was a URL, it would navigate within the Lightning experience as if it was a URL. And this is really, really powerful for you to construct essentially lists of data. Here, I'm actually just passing things in, in a kind of a dumb way, in a hard-coded way, but I'm just trying to point out that all I'm really doing here is I'm setting the definitions of the columns, and then I'm setting the values of the rows, and this would traditionally be done by Apex. But for simplicity of today's demo, I didn't want to do that and kind of confuse or kind of make it more complex, and just showing, I'm just passing in essentially an array, and within the array, an object for each row. I'm essentially then setting the attributes that then get passed into the data table, which again is right here. Right here. So you can see what I'm doing there. And if you want, with the data table, you can actually hide the checkboxes, or you can include the checkboxes so people can make selections, and then you can then perform actions based on that. And so the rest of the code is just around handling clicks, but this is really the power of building these customizations with the base Lightning components. This entire component took me about 2 hours to write. Which is really nothing, because one, I'm not, a developer is my primary job, but you don't have to deal with the styling. You don't have to deal with having to manage the layouts. You don't have to rebuild a data table component, which is quite complex. All you're simply doing is using these base components, constructing it into this overall experience component, which we call customer onboarding, and then using the app builder to go ahead and display that within the experience itself, like I have here when I launch it, right? that all being said, hopefully this was helpful in kind of the construction of how I use these base components and build out an experience component. And now I want to walk you through just the last few slides, which hopefully is going to excite you, which is the set of base components, the roadmap for the Lightning Components teams. So in Winter 18, here is just a small sample of some of the components you're going to see. So we're going to be giving you programmatic access to what's essentially called Lightning Path. And there's 3 flavors of this. This is how much people have wanted this component. We're giving you a fully engrossed, metadata-driven, through this kind of setup experience path that you can actually have for every single stage of that path. You can have a sub layout with its own fields and some help text, essentially what you see on opportunities today. But if you just want the bar at the top and it's dictated by a pick list, we also have Lightning Pick List Path. And if you don't want it based on a pick list and all you want is the visual UI of it and the full extensibility as a developer to do whatever you want with it, then what you can do is actually use the Lightning progress indicator with the variant of path, and then it's 100% up to you. Some of the other things we have is dynamic icons, the dual list box, which I showed, the accordion, the vertical navigation, which is what you see here on the right, and then, of course, the data table and the file upload. So in previous releases, you got maybe 4 components or 2 components every time we did a new release. But in winter, we added 32 additional components. So we really expanded the set of base components for you to leverage as developers. You know, everything from now, there's a Lightning Flow component. If you want to integrate a flow, we have additional input components. We have radio group. We have a tree component. And as I mentioned before, the notifications library and the overlay library allow you to build into your controller some of that logic to either bring up a new panel or essentially notify people of key changes. So this is kind of in addition or kind of a broader extension of what you had before, which was just really the show toast. This is allowing you to do a lot more with the notifications library.
Wow, that's a lot to read on that slide. That's a lot of different components in the roadmap. So is there somewhere where people can check this online?
Absolutely. So the developer, on developer.salesforce.com, if you go to the Lightning component reference doc, they're already showing the preview of the documentation that is going to be released with Winter 18. So you can start to go through it, understand how to use things like the data table or the file upload component as a way to really kind of see all the benefit of these components.
Great. So people who are watching this, you don't have to write all these down now.
Yes. I'm sure you're maybe screenshotting, but just go to developer.salesforce.com and look at the latest preview document of the component reference. But this is a huge increase, 45% increase in our components. And the one thing I am going to point out as well is you see here there's a component that's kind of hidden in there that's called Lightning Output Field. Part of our base component, most of our base components typically are, as I mentioned earlier, kind of dumb because we allow you, the developer, to wire up whatever you would like with it. But we also want our components just to work. We want to take a lot of that necessity of how you writing code away, especially when it's specific to Salesforce kind of metadata and data. And so what this Lightning Output Field would do is exactly how you expect it. In the past with Visualforce, you would have Apex output field. And all you would do is say, here's my field name, and it doesn't matter if it's a lookup, if it's a pick list, if it's a encrypted field, it's a string, it's a rich text area. We would simply just output whatever it is. That is exactly what Lightning Output Field does now. So if you're building, for example, a form, right, and you have 10 fields, 20 fields, 50 fields, hundreds of fields, which you shouldn't be doing, but in case you are, you no longer have to sit there and map each field to its respective type into essentially the respective Lightning component. Now, all you have to do is essentially iterate over those fields through Lightning Output Field, and it'll put it all there for you. Now, I'm sure one of the questions is going to be, well, what about Input Field? So Input Field, if you've ever heard me give this kind of, maybe not this specific talk, but at various events, Lightning Input Field did slip to the spring release. So it is not part of Winter 18. It is going to be part of the spring release. And for any of you that have built these yourself, you understand the complexities of kind of supporting all the various inputs. So that, as I mentioned, will be coming in spring 18. So, of course, where can you go for next steps? We have a lot of great Trailhead content. We're going to be adding more and more content going forward. You know, if you aren't familiar with Lightning components, start with the basics trail on Lightning components. And for those of you who, you know, are a little bit more advanced and you really want to know about the security of the Lightning components, we also have that as a badge, which is really helpful with the fact that we also have locker service, which is really meant to keep your data secure in a component-based framework. So on that note, I think we're going to move to
Almost.
Almost.
No, I took those modules. They're great modules, and I noticed that it actually walks through quite a lot of what you've been going through here for the Winter 18 release. But there's also the Lightning Now tour, which Marcus mentioned in passing earlier. So it's coming to a lot of different cities around the world. So do check the events calendar for Lightning Now to see if it's coming near you so you can register. And I think you're going to be this little thing called Dreamforce.
I am going to be at Dreamforce. And on the Lightning Now tour, I will be at both London and Paris next week.
Wow, fancy.
So if any of our family, you know, that's on the webcast is in London or Paris, those are happening next week as well.
Great. So if you do have other questions and you don't want to talk to them on Twitter, you can also chase them up in person in London and Paris in the coming weeks.
And of course, Dreamforce coming in the first week in November.
First week in November, that's right.
We will be having sessions. I believe we're going to have a booth that's dedicated to components.
Where and Marcus will be standing right there.
I was there for a good part of Trailhead DX, if anyone came to that. But, you know, we really think that this is a huge release for Lightning components. A lot of the components that were really frustrating to not have are delivered as part of this release. And our goal is by spring to have what we believe is kind of parity with what our developers need and expect from kind of, you know, JavaScript component-based frameworks, and as well as kind of what they expect from previously using Visualforce components. So we're really happy of where we're going to end up by the spring release.
Yeah, I know that the Visualforce components are pretty exciting with Lightning. So I know that Kanyar, who's also on your team, will be talking about some of the features that you touched upon lightly today in this webinar. So he's going to be chatting together with a lot of other product managers this Friday in our Release Readiness Live broadcast. And he'll be talking about some of these things, but diving into Visualforce and Lightning components and possible parity. So if you haven't registered for that, try to sign up online, and we'll share the link on our GoToWebinar, and you can also learn from Kanyar. So with that, I think it's about time to dive into Q&A. What do you think, Marcus?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. There's so many questions, and I think we could We could answer most of them. Some of them have been answered as you've been progressing through your demo. The first question I think that I need to ask that comes up towards everybody who joins us for these webinars is, where can I get my hands on this code that you're showing? So they're super excited. Where can they learn?
Oh, how about I will post it on GitHub.
Lovely.
And like I said, it's when I was demoing the code, I try to keep it simple, so I didn't write a bunch of Apex controllers, but you can definitely use it as kind of a starting point. And the one thing which I know, because we've worked with, kind of initial pilot customers on the data table, is when you pull things back for the data table, make sure that you flatten everything out. So if you essentially have kind of nested queries in your SOCL, you will need to flatten that for the data table. But,
okay.
It's just worth me mentioning while we talk about that code that I'll publish.
People are already demanding links on GitHub, so
yeah, I will.
He's still talking, folks. Just let him give him a minute to finish the webinar.
I'm no problem. I will post it as soon as they probably won't let me leave this room. So there you go.
So we're getting a lot of questions now. Just one straight off the Q&A is, will all the current Apex components continue to work in Lightning? And can we use Apex components alongside Lightning components on pages?
So yes is a quick answer. There's really, this is something we go into. I think Camille is going to be talking a lot about this on Friday as well. We support Visualforce in Lightning. We support Lightning in Visualforce. Visualforce, we love it. And our customers have loved it for years. And it's never going away. We're always going to support it. That being said, Visualforce is not a technology that really it's a different technology stack than Lightning itself. The reason why, we moved, or we essentially have new Lightning components in the Lightning framework, is because it's fundamentally a newer technology than the traditional kind of server-side model of Visualforce, right? And so if you want to expose your Visualforce in Lightning, here's some kind of pro tips, okay? One, well, let me first kind of set the stage. Your Visualforce is completely cordoned off in the sense that it doesn't know about anything else on the page, and the page doesn't know anything else about Visualforce. So typically where we've seen issues is people will put, for example, like a create or an edit page or some sort of Visualforce that will update various values on the page. And the other components on the page, the Lightning components, which do not know about Visualforce and what operation just happened, the data gets out of sync, right? Now, eventually that data will be refreshed and it'll look fine. But you will start to see some of those challenges. And so my pro tip is, if you have a Visualforce customization that kind of works as its own silo, right? Like it doesn't need anything from the page or the rest of the Lightning experience that it's displayed on, and that it doesn't change or alter any of the other data that is displayed on the page within Lightning, I would go ahead and say, look at Visualforce as a way to bring that customization into Lightning. We also have great new enhancements coming into winter, where you essentially just with a few simple tags, you can style all your Visualforce to look like Lightning, which is really, really helpful for the experience.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, we'll have Camille dive into it more.
Yeah.
And I do know that there are sessions at Dreamforce where we dive into this. So there'll be 40-minute breakout sessions. Be sure to bookmark it when we make that available in Agenda Builder. And if you can't make it to Dreamforce, we'll be recording those sessions so you can check into it afterwards. A lot of the questions that we have here from people viewing this, they were curious about how these new base Lightning components work in mobile, specifically Salesforce 1. So can you give us a few words about that?
Yeah, so in the documentation, we reference if it works for mobile or not. Our goal, even if it's not necessarily what's going to be in winter, is all components that make sense, right, to show in mobile, we plan to show in mobile. So I'll give you an example of one that may not. For example, the dual list box, where you have two kind of boxes of information side by side. Mobile real estate doesn't provide kind of the right experience for that. But things like our Lightning pick list, or sorry, our Lightning select and Lightning combo box, we plan to, of course, have it work in mobile. So I guess the easiest way to answer this is take a look at the documentation. But our long-term goal is everything that should be in mobile will work in mobile, but we're going in steps here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, it will work.
Yeah.
Ish.
It will work if it says it works, and if it doesn't work yet, we will make it work soon.
Okay, great, thank you. So this next question here was about the onboarding component that you were walking through, and apologies if this has already been answered in the course of your demo. The question here was, can you also launch the onboarding component as a custom action?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Custom actions now support Lightning components, and you would just choose that component as what to show in the quick action. Different ways of kind of skinning that cat.
Okay, great. This is an interesting question. As a developer, I would like to learn from the best and most experienced Lightning component developers. So is there a chance to open source implementations of the newly created Lightning-based components?
That is something we do want, and essentially are thinking about. For the components, as I've said, that don't have any logic built in. They don't have, I refer to them as dumb components, in the sense that there is nothing that they do besides kind of visualization and making sure the styling, everything is right. Those are a lot easier to open source on our side because it doesn't require any logic from Salesforce. But something, for example, like the Lightning output field, that is, very closely tied to our metadata and our data, and probably something we want to outsource, but it's definitely something we're considering.
Okay, to follow on the Lightning output field comment that you just made, a quick question here was, can we dynamically pass the field name to Lightning output field?
Of course, yeah. That's the example I was kind of describing. You would create an iteration by grabbing a list of fields either from your layout or from a field set, and then you would just simply use the output field to display them all.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you. So this next question I have might be better suited towards David Green, who will be presenting at the Release Readiness live webinar on Friday. Okay. But this question is for communities. So specifically regarding the Napili template. So when we drag and drop the record list component, we are not able to customize it, as in that custom lists button is not functioning. Is there a way to make the custom list button in Community Cloud workable?
That is our goal. So for a lot of reasons, the various clouds and various teams have had to prioritize and focus on certain features at a time. So our goal, just like Salesforce One, just like Service Cloud and everywhere else, we really want these components to work the same way everywhere. But that's obviously a roadmap, right? We're gonna get to there over time.
For sure, and I'm sure you're talking quite a lot with the Community Cloud team on that roadmap, and they are going to have their own live broadcast, I think next week or the week after. Well, they'll dive more into Community Cloud and how that works together with Lightning. So we're almost at time, and we have just one more question.
Okay.
And I think you or I can probably answer this one. But the question is, can I get some fancy stickers if I can't make it to Dreamforce?
I'm gonna leave that one to you.
So you can definitely get stickers from the Lightning Now tour. It'll be Cody and Cloudy and Astro wearing little blue superhero suits. One way you can get stickers from us is we just launched with Salesforce developers the Don't Stop Deploying competition. So if you earn some Trailhead badges on the topic that we're sharing online, we will get some swag out to you. So if you can't make a Dreamforce, and if you can't make it to the Lightning Now tours, but you still want some Salesforce developer swag, just check our social on Salesforce developers, and you'll see the links you can click and the badges you need to earn to get those stickers. We also have really lovely enamel pins, which I'm personally very excited about. So I think with that, we're at time. So Marcus, is there anything else you wanted to share before we close off today?
No, I just thank everyone for your time, and I'm excited to bring Lightning components and this huge new set of Lightning components, in the hands of our developers, and eager to get both their feedback. And I promise, if there's things we didn't uncover, little glitches, I have a whole team ready to fix it.
So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.